Hello everyone and welcome to A Psychology. My name is Miss M and today we are going over Saavedra and Silverman's Phobia study. This is in the learning approach in 2002. So get ready, here we go. And if you're new here, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for liking this video and subscribing. It really helps the algorithm, helps my videos get out to more students. I would like to mention that my Google Classroom has now moved to Patreon. So if you would like a little extra help in your 9990 syllabus, please click the link below in this video. It'll take you right to my Patreon class. And without further ado, let's get into this learning approach. Saavedra and Silverman, we have a 2002 study, and this is a case study, so here we go. Let's talk about the background information. Okay, so there's a lot of background theories for Saavedra and Silverman that we're going to cover. Why? Because there's really not a lot of the study, not a lot of information in the study, so just tapping into the background information and understanding different types of conditioning and the ways that we manipulate behavior, that's really going to be beneficial to you in any part of paper 1, paper 2, possibly even paper 3 and paper 4 if that's something that you're going towards. So a big part of this background information is so you can understand how phobias even come into existence, how they are created, okay? So we're going to start with classical conditioning. This study will not touch upon operant conditioning, okay? We're going to talk about classical conditioning and then a few other types of experiences that you might need to know for the exam. It might just be good to have a good understanding, even for just life in general. Okay, classical conditioning. We have an unconditioned response. Okay, this response is a natural response. It is something that is uncontrollable, okay? And this response could be the salivation of the salivation glands in your mouth, or for a dog, Pavlov's dog, when food is present, okay? Food makes the dog salivate. So salivating is this natural response that is occurring to the food. Now we are taking that salivation and that food and we are linking the food to some type of neutral stimuli, okay? And for Pavlov's case, we are talking about a bell. This could be anything though. This could be a clicking of a pen, okay? It could be a doorbell. It could be a certain phrase that is said, okay? So anything that does not already produce some type of response can be used as a neutral stimulus. Okay, so the unconditioned stimulus is the food, and naturally it's already paired with an unconditioned response of salivating. Now we want to take that unconditioned stimulus of the food and we want to pair it with the bell. So every time that we present the food, we hear the bell at the same exact time. Now, after several pairings of the food and the bell at the same exact time, over time, Pavlov discovered that he could take the food away and the bell itself, which is now considered the conditioned stimulus, made his dog salivate. So the salivating at the end, the salivating that is caused by the bell is actually now called the conditioned response. Before, the salivating was being done to food, which was being done natural. So we called it an unconditioned response. But now that the salivating has occurred because we made it occur with the bell, it is now called a conditioned response. So a couple years ago when we changed out the syllabus, we took out the behavioralist approach and we put in the learning approach. And as a psychologist myself, what I feel like happened is there was a lot of learning that was going on in behavioral psychology, and behavioral does not account for any emotions. It doesn't count for any biological things in the body. It doesn't count for any cognitive associations in the body. So when we're trying to shape behavior, we see that in some cases like phobias that are associating an experience with an extreme emotion like fear or disgust, when we see these pairings, we're saying, okay, this isn't just behavior. There's emotions involved. So therefore, we cannot just put this in like a behavioral approach. This has to be a learning approach, because with learning, there are other things that come into play, whether it's someone's environment, someone's emotion, someone's cognition. So a lot of people are not aware of the term expectancy learning. And I know you're gonna know what this is after I describe it, because if you can learn to undo this in your life, it'll change your life, okay? So expectancy learning is when it's usually a fear-based type of learning, that you take a previously neutral stimuli, okay? Let's just say, it could be discussed too, let's just say it's an average day and you're going to Dunkin' Donuts or Tim Hortons or Starbucks or whatever coffee shop, donut shop that you have near you. Remember, I'm in the States. So you go there every day and you get your favorite donut before school, but one day before school, I mean, you were already sick. You were already sick before you got there, but you had your donut and then the stomach bug hit you and you started to vomit a lot. It was an unpleasant experience. You are going to start to associate that pleasant experience or a threatening experience or a fearful experience, whatever it is, with that once neutral donut. Okay, and in the future, what's going to happen the next time you go to grab that donut is you're going to remember that experience. Here's another example that may not have been the best. That's more of like aversion. We can actually have aversion therapies and things like that, where we try to keep people away from things. So that would be more aversion therapy. But expectancy learning, for example, say you're in a relationship and your significant other cheats on you. Now you end that relationship and now you're kind of fearful to get into a new one, but then you get into a new one anyway. And now all you can think about is being cheated on again. And you start to act in ways that like you're already being cheated on, and it's all based on past experiences. Fear being the biggest part of this emotion is we are avoiding things that are fearful. So therefore, if expectancy learning happens throughout our lifetime, what we tend to do is start to avoid things in our lives, whether we are avoiding relationships or we are avoiding experiences, is because one time in our past, we had a pairing of this once neutral stimuli, going on vacation with the family, to it turning out to be a horrible or threatening or fearful experience, okay? Like maybe you lost your dog on vacation and therefore you're really afraid to bring your dog on vacation anywhere else, whether it's a new dog or a different animal, okay? That's expectancy learning. And if we can make ourselves more aware of this, that this happens, history doesn't repeat itself as much as we think. That phrase is for the stars. I feel like that if you get bit by a dog when you're a little child, it's not like every single time you see a dog you're going to get bit, but you're going to feel like you are, and you might even fear that experience again in the future. So the last key term I'm going to talk about is evaluative learning. And this is actually a vocab word. So I'm going to put it down here exactly what it means verbatim from the book. But this is basically a form of classical conditioning where instead of like before, when I said expectancy learning is you're taking a situation, a stimuli, and you expect a certain outcome. Well, evaluative learning is when you take that same neutral stimuli, but you're pairing it with a certain emotion. And unlike expectancy learning, where it's mainly fear, evaluative learning tends to have more disgust in it, and definitely fear, which is where a lot of researchers believe phobias kind of begin, is this evaluative learning process. So really quickly, I'm going to talk about classical conditioning as it relates to nature versus nurture, because this might be a topic that you are asked on the exam. So in classical conditioning, the environment is considered the main influence on behavior. What this means is that humans are basically blank slates. We are saying that when you're born, your environment is shaping your behavior. And this is a nurture approach, okay? Any type of conditioning actually that happens when you're alive, when from a small child on, this is purely based on nature. It's based on your surroundings, the people you're surrounded by, your environment, your culture, your what you watch on YouTube. But let's get into the study, because the aim of this study was to examine the role of classical conditioning in a relation to fear and avoidance of a particular stimuli, which basically means we aren't exactly trying to alleviate the symptoms. I mean, that's not the main goal because our participant had been in treatment for a couple years. We really wanted to see the role that classical conditioning played, and researchers kind of believe, I'll say kind of, they believe, especially those in this learning approach, they believe that if a phobia is a learned behavior, then it's definitely something that we can unlearn. To be specific, researchers wanted to see if using a type of exposure therapy could reduce disgust and distress associated with buttons. This is a case study done by Saavedra and Silvermam on a 9-year-old boy with a button phobia. Now, why would they choose a case study for this? The first thing is because we are going to be able to collect large amounts of qualitative data and really figure out why and how this phobia came about. Our sample in this study is only one participant. I know in your book it might say a 9-year-old Hispanic American boy and his mother, but his mother was not part of the experiment. She was part of the experiment as giving positive reinforcement, but she was not the one being experimented on. She probably did provide a lot of the information as far as the interviews and things that happened, because our researchers really want to get an in-depth look at what is going on in this boy's life, because he was admitted to the Child Anxiety and Phobia program at Florida International University in Miami, and he met the requirements for having a phobia of buttons. And from that point on is kind of when Saavedra and Silvermam took him as a case study so that they could work one-on-one. Because remember, case studies are not used unless the area that we are studying needs a lot of in-depth look that is in qualitative data form, or if it's something really new and not a lot of people have it, and it needs to be studied in depth that way before we can bring it to a wide variety of people. Okay, so remember we talked about evaluative learning. Now, this 9-year-old boy, he was about 5 years old and he was in class, and imagine knocking over a really large container of buttons off of your teacher's desk. Now, I believe the buttons were used for counting or some type of math. It was something to do with math, probably just like an estimation kind of game, where how many gumballs do you think are in here? And I believe he walked by and spilled the jar. The buttons went everywhere. And he experienced a lot of anxiety when that happened. And here everyone is picking up buttons and he is having a lot of anxiety. So this is evaluative learning at its finest. He then starts to associate these buttons with anxiety, with disgust, with fear. Mother did give informed consent, and believe it or not, they did a very thorough background investigation to see whether or not abuse could have been the cause of this. And like I just told you, it was not the cause of this. So just to be clear, I know a lot of you might have fears, might have disgust for things, might have anxiety over things, but in order for it to classify as a phobia, it would have to interfere with your daily life. It would have to cause problems not only for you, but for the people around you. If they had to change their behavior because of you, or if it caused a lot of ruckus, or it caused mainly changes in behavior. So in this case, think about it. Buttons are on clothing. Buttons are on a lot of clothing, even jeans. Okay, and I couldn't even imagine if I had a small child, he was 5 years old, right? He comes right up to my waist when I hug him, and here I have a button right on my jeans. Like, maybe he doesn't hug me because of what I'm wearing. Maybe I have to change what I'm wearing every day in order to make sure to not cause fear. Or maybe I have to be on the lookout and look for people and what they're wearing ahead of us, and when we're in this grocery store, to make sure that we don't come in contact with someone that's wearing buttons. That type of behavior is considered a phobia and does need treatment. In case study fashion, our researchers were very thorough with interviews. When we're working with children, we really have to be able to make sure that they understand what's going on. So specifically in this study, they created what's called the feelings thermometer. And this feelings thermometer enabled researchers to basically take different looking buttons, different size buttons, different shape buttons, and arrange them on like a hierarchy of disgust. And I'll display what that chart looks like here. And what you'll see is the stimuli on the left side. So this is large denim jean buttons, small denim jean buttons, clip-on denim jean buttons, large plastic buttons that are colored, some that are clear. And if you go all the way down to the bottom, number 11, you'll see small plastic clear buttons. Now, if you look to the right, you'll see this disgust rating. This is the rating that was given to the buttons by the boy of how he felt when he was presented with each. So if you look at the top, it does go in order. You'll see that number 1 of large denim buttons on this scale, it was a 9-point scale he was given, 0 to 8. 8 being the most fearful or the most disgusting, 0 being the least fearful, the least disgusting. So we have large denim jean buttons that are given a 2, and we have these really small, clear plastic buttons that are given a score of 8. Now, the exact reasoning why he gave these specific scores doesn't really matter. You could theorize that over the years, wearing large denim jean buttons, maybe his mom wore jeans a lot. Maybe he had to get used to it. Maybe he was exposed to those jeans more over time, which created less fear. So this hierarchy of fear and disgust, this scale that we have, is basically a baseline. This is our baseline testing so that we can see if there are any improvements over time. What do I mean by baseline? We have to have some type of score that we can see quantitatively that will change over time. Or maybe it won't change over time, but we're hoping for change over time. For example, if your teacher gives you an exam on the very first day of school about all the content that you're going to cover in the entire year, chances are you're not going to do very well, especially because you don't know the material. But when you take that same exam again during the midterm, you are going to get a better grade, or you should get a better grade, because you've been learning some of these areas and these things that were on that exam the first time. Now, let's fast forward to the end of the year. Let's take our final, but we're going to take the same exam again. Now, what we can do is we can see change over time because we are taking the same exact exam and we are looking at the scores in the beginning, before treatment, in the middle of treatment, and then at the end of treatment per se, if you were talking about treatment or a school year. And this is so important because we want quantitative data to show that there has been some improvement or that we were able to help this boy in any way. Did these therapies work? What were those therapies? Let's go over those therapies now. So the boy was treated with 2 types of therapies. We have exposure therapy and we have positive reinforcement. Now, I know we didn't go over positive reinforcement in the beginning, but we do see that a lot in Pepperberg's study. So if you haven't watched that video yet, please go watch that Pepperberg video. And if you haven't liked this video and you're still here and you're enjoying it, please give this video a like and subscribe to my channel. I really appreciate it. It helps the algorithm. That's what they tell me. I know a lot of you are asking, how did they use positive reinforcement? Because what we know from positive reinforcement is you're given something that you enjoy and we want that behavior to continue. So when he's fearful of buttons, how do we get him to stop that? Positive reinforcement means in this case that every time the boy is around buttons and he doesn't react, we give him praise. We're hoping that he enjoys that praise and that he continues to not act in a disgusting, fearful, anxious way. Now, I know what you're thinking. We can't just start with positive reinforcement. We have to have some type of lessening of these fears. We can't just pretend that the fears don't exist. And if we jumped right into positive reinforcement, we might be asking our participant to just sit there and pretend and don't react, pretend these fears don't exist, but are we really solving the issue? Now, exposure therapy is going to help us solve this issue. Exposure therapy can be done on many different levels. It can be done with just visuals. It can actually even be done with allergies. Yes, that's right. A lot of people who have peanut allergies, the way that they come out or grow out of these peanut allergies is by small exposure to peanuts over time, maybe starting with micrograms and then moving all the way up to a gram. It's that small of a process when it comes to allergies, just because our health and our medical is at stake. But when it comes to exposure therapy, it's very similar. Now, in this case, we didn't really exactly have a lot of buttons to give the boy or hold or put in, expose him to. The very, very first thing we had the little boy do was to imagine the buttons. And we technically called this imagery exposure. And if you're wondering what it's called when we actually physically handle the buttons, it's called in vivo exposure, but not specifically for this study, we did imagery exposure. To start the exercise, we asked the boy to imagine buttons falling all over him, falling on his skin. It was touching his skin. Imagine the smell of those buttons. When he was mentally imagining this, he was encouraged to tell the experimenters how he was feeling, self-reports. This imagery or exposure therapy basically continued by asking the little boy to imagine these large denim buttons and then working our way down to the small clear buttons, asking him how he feels. Doing this exercise over and over a little bit did alleviate some of the initial fears, which then we asked his mother to continue the positive reinforcement afterwards at home. Okay, so I know you all are wondering if this worked. What are the results of the study? How can I use this in my real life? Here we go. So the outcome of the therapy was very successful. The exposure to the hierarchy of fear and the buttons, it actually led to more positive behavior around buttons. It led to him touching and holding buttons later on in other sessions. However, there is something to note about his specific subjective ratings of disgust. Those increased over time, and by the fourth session, a number of items on the hierarchy, such as hugging his mother while wearing buttons, had increased from his original score. So it means over time, fear and anxiety increased due to positive reinforcement. Let me say that one more time. Now, his behavior did change, but the scores that he gave for fear and disgust on certain things, such as hugging his mother with the jean denim buttons, those numbers increased. His mother did do this positive reinforcement while she was at home, so it wasn't monitored 100% of the time. So we don't know 100% if she did it correctly. And besides the fact that the mother could have been doing the positive reinforcement wrong, it is possible that she could have been doing the positive reinforcement extremely well, almost too well. Think about this. If you're a young boy and you're not showing your behavior is not showing that you are anxious around the buttons and then you are getting praise, that you're not actually reinforcing less anxiety if the anxiety is still present. If the anxiety is still present, you're reinforcing the anxiety. The behavior is gone, so you're reinforcing the good behavior. This is a chart showing the positive reinforcement therapy. You can see, significantly between sessions 2 and 3, it continues to rise in distress, and it's very significant actually. So it seems it's very possible that his fear was what was being positively reinforced over time. And this chart is going to explain the imagery exposure therapy. Basically, what you see is that severity rating of an 8 during the first trial. It reduced to a 5 during the second trial or session of exposure therapy. And by the third trial, it was down to a 3. This study would technically be considered a longitudinal study. A lot of case studies are. There was follow-up treatment that was 6 months and 12 months. And at these assessment sessions, the boy did report feeling minimal distress, and he no longer fit the criteria to be diagnosed as having a phobia. He no longer had a fear of buttons. He was able to wear buttons on his school uniform every day when he went to school. It no longer affected his daily life. Overall, the conclusions of this study state that emotions and cognitions relating to disgust are important when learning new responses to phobic stimuli. The second thing that we found out is that imagery exposure can have long-term effect on reducing the stress associated with specific phobias as it tackles negative evaluations. Now, before we get into the evaluation of the study, I want you to imagine yourself in this exposure therapy. I want you to think of a different phobia. This could help you on paper too. I want you to think of a different phobia, and I want you to think of 8 different scenarios that someone could imagine to get over those phobias. And I want you to quickly write it down below in the comments. It doesn't have to be long. You can use bullet points. If you can't think of 8, think of 5. We're going to evaluate Saavedra and Silverman's case study right now using GRAVE. Now, if you remember, G, generalizability, R for reliability, A for application, V for validity, and E for ethics. And I'm also going to go over domain characteristics at the end. Since this is a case study, the sample is small and it's very difficult to generalize this to the general population. The participant was diagnosed with a particular phobia of buttons. It makes this case less likely to be representative of the general population. But can we take what we learned from exposure therapy and try it on other humans, other children? I think we can. I think that this study is not as generalizable to people, but more to phobias. When it comes to the reliability of the study, it's going to be difficult for researchers doing case studies to make something reliable, especially when we don't have a lot of standardized procedures. In this case, it was really important for our participant to create his own hierarchy of fear and disgust, something that was specific to his phobia. So creating something that was standard and that could be measured across a lot of different phobias, it just wasn't going to be relevant or informative to personal progress. Also, a lot of the positive reinforcement was done by mom at home, and the researchers couldn't control any aspect of that. Not able to control any of this part of the procedure is really going to create low reliability in this case study. Let's talk about the application, the usefulness of the study. Did this study improve psychology as a subject? The answer is yes, I truly believe so. So we found our patient was no longer classified as having a phobia at the end of our experiment. This is amazing. Any intervention that is given to a participant or a patient that is in an attempt to create a better way of living or better behavior or less anxiety, when we can do that, when we can find a therapy or a treatment that does alleviate all of that, I mean, what is treatment for? To alleviate those bad, negative, fearful reactions, emotions. When we see that exposure therapy works to no longer classify someone as having a phobia, we want to take that information of exposure therapy and what it means, what does exposure therapy require, and let's take that therapy and let's now move it to a new phobia and see if it works across all phobias. So this does improve psychology as a subject. The validity of the study, there's 2 areas we're going to look into, internal and external validity. Now, when we look at the internal validity of the study, we're looking at things like measurements. Did we measure what we intended to measure? And because we don't have an independent variable in the study, we have to look at other areas. And specifically, I'm going to narrow in on the standardization of the feelings thermometer. Also, what makes a study more valid, which doesn't normally happen in a lot of studies, is the qualitative data, and this is what I'm talking about. We did see a change in behavior from the beginning of the study to the end, but can we be sure that that is why? Can we be sure that it was the exposure therapy that did it, that helped? Yes, because we conducted self-reports and interviews with this 9-year-old child. This is going to make it really noticeable that the improvements that we saw in the child was due to the exposure therapy, especially if he tells us. As far as external validity goes, aka ecological validity, it's a case study, and it's pretty safe to say that most case studies are going to have good ecological validity. Specifically, even though we had to go probably to some type of office or laboratory to do interviews or perform the exact exposure therapy, a lot of the study was done at home. A lot of the study, the mother did the positive reinforcement in the child's natural environment. So you can argue that a majority of the study was done in the child's natural environment, and therefore it's our external validity or ecological validity is going to be high in this study. And as you might know, higher ecological validity means that something is more generalizable because the environment is natural. Let's quickly get into the ethics. There's really not much to see here. The mother was with her son a majority of the time, all the time. She gave consent, and it was good that she gave consent because the exposure therapy could have been a little anxious or frightening for the child. Now, what I really want to get into is the demand characteristics, because I do believe that this does affect the validity, the internal validity, just a little bit, and I'll let you know how. I remember earlier I talked about the fact that this study is considered a longitudinal study, meaning that we are doing this study over a long period of time. It's not done in one day. So what happens is there's a rapport that is created between the experimenter and the client. And when we have this, a rapport is like a good relationship. And when we have this, there's less room for anonymity. And that could be part of the ethics of this. This could be placed in the ethics a little bit too, but there's really no anonymity or objectivity because everybody knows what the end goal is, which is creating high demand characteristics. Now, I'm going to be really honest with you guys about something, and this is why having a case study may not be completely generalizable. Maybe the results are not exactly valid, and this is the reason, my real life reason for you. When I was 14 years old, I was in a relationship with another girl, and my parents didn't accept this at all, and I had to go to therapy. Now, therapy is kind of like a case study because it's just one individual. We are working through things. There is some type of intervention, and then we want to come out on the other side a different person. That's ultimately the goal of therapy. So because I was going to sessions, multiple sessions, I was developing a rapport with my psychologist. Now, my psychologist may not have had the same rapport that I had with her. She had a rapport with my parents as well. Now, what happened was I started to understand my therapist a little bit more. I started to understand where it was going. I started to see what the end result was, what everybody wanted from me by the end of this, their end goal. And their end goal was to cure me, I guess. Once I knew what the end goal was, I gave them the end goal. I gave them the socially desirable answer. I gave them all of the demand characteristics they wanted on a silver platter. So you have to think about this when we are doing case studies and everybody knows the end result. If the boy was not comfortable, if he was very uncomfortable, if he did not like this therapy, he could have potentially tried to end it sooner, if that makes sense to some of you, because he didn't want to go through it anymore. He could have lied on some of the scales. Don't you think it's a little weird how he still scored buttons as fearful, but the experience wasn't fearful? I mean, we understand evaluative learning, and remember what I said, that was basically you are connecting an experience with an emotion, but we have to account for these demand characteristics in case studies, because if someone doesn't like where it's going and they understand where the study is going, it can then be manipulated, and the behavior that we're watching is not genuine. This concludes our evaluation and understanding of our entire case study of Saavedra and Silverman with this boy that has a phobia of buttons. Overall, the aim of the study was to improve the boy's quality of life. And I know it didn't say that, but in a case study, we are always trying to improve quality of life. When we input an intervention, we are trying to improve quality of life. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for watching. I am Miss M, and thank you for being in my Patreon classroom. And if you like TikTok, if you're on Instagram and you want to follow me on one of those platforms as well, I would really much so appreciate it. You can always send me an email at apsychology9990@gmail.com. And again, have a wonderful day.